To connect the foot pedal, insert the plug of the foot pedal into the socket for the foot pedal and the mains plug via the foot pedal. The more pressure that is exerted on the supplied waste container collects the cut-off remnants when leaving slots. Then guide the two bottom restraints into their slots. Switching the needles is easier if you first remove the free arm cover. Turn the hand wheel towards you until the needles are in the top position. Then turn the needle screw with the supplied screwdriver until the needles are loose. You can now remove the needle. To reinsert the needle, the flattened side to the rear. Needle holder and then retighten the needle screw. To make certain types of seam, and to more easily operate the seam with adjustment wheel, bring the upper movable blade into a rest position. For this, press the upper knife to the right and rotate it until it is firmly seated. The machine is delivered as standard with pre-threaded white yarn. For a better understanding, in this video guide, yarns of different colors are used. Before you start threading, always place the main switch at off and disconnect the plug. Behind the front flap there is a diagram with instructions for threading and on which the courses of the individual threads are marked in various colors. Open the front flap and guide the yarn of the upper looper, seen here as a red thread, from back to front through the thread tree. Run the thread into the appropriate thread guide. For this, pull the thread down until it slips into the thread guide. Hold the thread firmly, then guide it between the discs of the thread tension selector and pull it down. Thread the yarn in the looper area as per the red markings. Then pull the thread from back to front through the upper looper and lay about 10 cm of thread behind the stitch plate. Guide the yarn of the lower looper, seen here as a yellow thread, from back to front through the thread tree. Run the thread into the appropriate thread guide. For this, pull the yellow thread down until it slips into the thread guide. Then guide it between the discs of the thread tension selector and pull it down. Turn the hand wheel towards you until the lower looper stands on the far right. Thread the yarn in the looper area as per the yellow markings. Now firmly hold the yellow yarn with the supplied tweezers about 4 cm from the thread guide and then guide it up into the thread guide. This done, run the thread to the rear and over the upper end of the lower looper. Pull it carefully down so that it slides into the recess on the looper. Turn the hand wheel again so that the lower looper moves back into its normal position. The thread is now guided through the looper eyelet. Ensure that the yarn runs in the groove of the lower looper. Finally, pull the yellow thread for about 10 cm through the looper, lay it over the upper looper and then behind the stitch plate. Guide the yarn of the right needle, seen here as a green thread, from back to front through the thread tree. Run the thread into the appropriate thread guide. For this, pull the green thread down until it slips into the thread guide. Hold the thread firmly. Then guide it between the discs of the thread tension selector and pull it down. Thread the yarn as per the green markings. Thread it through the right needle and then place it behind the sewing foot. Guide the yarn of the left needle, seen here as a blue thread, from back to front through the thread tree. Run the thread into the appropriate thread guide. For this, pull the blue thread down until it slips into the thread guide. Then guide it between the discs of the thread tension selector and pull it down. Thread the yarn as per the blue markings. Thread it through the left needle and then place it behind the sewing foot. When yarn has been threaded for the first time, or it must be rethreaded after a yarn breakage, please carry out a trial run. For this, use a remnant which you no longer need. To set the stitch length, turn the adjustment wheel on the side of the machine. To find out which stitch length is suitable for which type of fabric, please refer to the printed instruction manual. The width of the seam can be determined by removing one of the two needles and using the seam width adjustment knob. For details of how you remove needles, see the section Inserting Removing Needles in these video instructions. To adjust the seam width adjustment knob, open the front flap. Then turn the seam width adjustment knob to the desired seam width. Orientate yourself on the scale on the stitch plate or follow the instructions in the printed manual. Upon delivery, the sewing foot pressure is set for medium weight materials. If you wish to use heavier or lighter materials, the pressure must be increased or decreased. To do this, insert the supplied small screwdriver into the hole on the upper side of the machine where the pressure adjustment screw is located. If the screwdriver is turned towards the plus, the pressure of the sewing foot increases. Turning it towards minus reduces the pressure. For this 4-thread stitch, you must set the seam width switch at S. Ensure that the switch is pushed as far as it will go, thus ensuring that tidy seams are sewn. Use the adjustment wheel to set a stitch length of between 2 and 4. For an overview of the recommended thread tensions for various fabrics, please refer to the graphic. For the 3-thread chain stitch, you must set the seam width switch at S. Ensure that the switch is pushed as far as it will go, thus ensuring that tidy seams are sewn. For this stitch, you will need either the thread of the left needle, the upper and the lower loop thread, or the thread of the right needle with the upper and the lower looper thread. The 4th thread, which is not needed for this stitch, is to be unthreaded and the required 2nd needle removed. Set a stitch length of between 2 and 4. For an overview of the recommended thread tensions for this type of stitch, please refer to the graphic. For the 2-thread overcast chain stitch, you must set the seam width switch at S. Ensure that the switch is pushed as far as it will go, thus ensuring that tidy seams are sewn. For this stitch you will need the thread of the left or right needle, the looper thread plus the supplied upper looper element. The threads not needed for this stitch are to be unthreaded and the unrequired needle removed. Finally, insert the small wire of the looper element into the eyelet of the upper looper and the plastic bolt from the front into the hole in the upper looper. If you do not need to use the upper looper element, you can store it in the slot behind the front flap. Set a stitch length of between 2 and 4. For an overview of the recommended thread tensions for this type of stitch, please refer to the graphic. All other possible variants for overlock seams can be obtained from the printed manual. For the working of jersey, knits and other stretchy fabrics, it is necessary to use a gathered overlock seam, so that afterwards you achieve a smooth result. For this it is necessary that the differential transport is set to a value greater than 1.0. The exact setting depends, however, on the material to be worked. Therefore, always sew a test seam beforehand. The following procedure makes it easier for you to change the thread. Cut the yarn still in the machine above the spool supports and place the new rolls of thread on the spool supports. Tie the ends of the new and the old thread together. Place all of the thread tension selectors at 0 and lift the sewing foot using the sewing foot lever. Pull on the other end of the yarn until the knots pass under the sewing foot. For threading it in the needle, pull on the other end until the knot is in the eye of the needle. Cut the yarn to the left and right of the knot, then carry out the rethreading.
Hé, zit je te kijken?